It all begins with news spreading throughout the city about the identity of a scammer being revealed anonymously. Reports stated that 30% of the population had already fallen victim. The estimated damage was around 100 billion won, along with other crimes. Up to that point, everything indicated that the suspect had been living off scams since childhood. He was believed to be fleeing through the city, avoiding police capture. Due to a lack of records, no one was certain about the con artist's names, but one 35-year-old man had been confirmed. His name was Han Junwoo, and as he walked the streets, he could hear his picture being shown on the news. Thus, the police continued their investigation, racing against time. In that context, the young man remembered 30 years earlier when he was questioned about a lost item. He told the man that he knew nothing about it. Crying, he insisted he hadn't seen anything related to what was being asked. The man grew worried and began to wonder where the missing item could be. And then he realized he had to leave the place before everything got out of control. The location was a daycare that only accepted rich children. And although he wasn't married, he was there for a specific purpose. While walking through the large hall, he bumped into a woman and accidentally brushed against the wine glass she was holding. But he had done this intentionally to reach the ring the woman was wearing, and after successfully stealing it without her noticing, he politely apologized. She reassured him kindly, saying she wasn't hurt and hadn't spilled her wine. As he left her, the man felt pleased that he hadn't been caught during the theft. While holding the ring, he realized his plan had worked, and he now just needed to get out. However, to his misfortune, the item slipped from his hand by accident. He then began to run desperately after the ring as it flew through the air and landed somewhere on the ground, and he was sure he had seen it fall near little Junwoo, which is why he questioned him about the lost item. But the boy cried and insisted that he didn't have it. The man grew worried that people would notice the crying child and decided to leave him. So he began to run away as one of the staff members approached Junwoo. She noticed he wasn't one of the children enrolled at the daycare and asked why he was crying. And the man fleeing was stunned to hear her say the child was an intruder. She asked him if he was the father of the unknown boy, and unable to believe what was happening, he quickly replied that he wasn't. However, to his surprise, Junwoo ran toward him, calling him dad. He, who had come there only to steal, now found himself in a huge mess. Junwoo began to cry and apologize, saying he wouldn't ask for toys anymore. The women nearby started whispering about cases where parents abandoned their children on purpose. Realizing that he wouldn't get out of the situation easily, he decided to take Junwoo with him, pretending he was his son. They left the daycare and entered a quiet alley. The man carried the child by the arm, a bit tired. He looked at Junwoo impatiently and asked what the boy's goal was. He set the child on the ground as he tried to understand why he had called him dad. But he didn't understand when the little boy said he was just acting like him. Junwoo realized that the man had been lying the entire time inside the daycare and admitted he had been watching everything. He said that the game of lies the man thought he was playing was already over. He was happy. He had enjoyed the whole thing. The adult asked about his home and his parents, but was surprised to hear the child say he had none. He then grew concerned about where the boy lived, learning that he was homeless. Junwoo said he went wherever and did the same things he had seen others do, until the other kids were picked up from the daycare. No one noticed him, and no one cared as long as no one saw him. Suddenly, he remembered something he had kept in his pocket. The man was confused when he heard the boy say he had won the game, and was quickly shocked when he saw what the boy was holding. The ring he had stolen earlier was now in the boy's possession. Junwoo extended his hand and asked if he had really won the game. The man began to recall the earlier moments when the boy had lied about not having it, and hadn't realized that while crying, he had hidden the ring in his hand. He was shocked that a 5-year-old child had managed to deceive him and everyone else, and he starts to worry about who that boy could be. Junwoo was watching him while holding that stolen ring. Soon, he grew saddened as he realized the boy hadn't reacted the way he expected. The man hears the child asking if he had been scared of him like the others were. He's confused about how he could possibly be scared of all that, and becomes even more shocked when he remembers it was just a small child. But he soon admits to himself that he was scared. As he observes Junwoo, he realizes the boy is talented. After thinking through it all so quickly, he prepares to say something. He extends one of his hands toward the boy, and lovingly invites him to come away with him. Junwoo widens his eyes in disbelief, and takes the man's hand, accepting the invitation. In that moment, the young boy knew his whole life would change, because for the first time, he had gained a family. The first father of his entire life, Il-nam. However, there was something he didn't know back then. Along with leaving with Il-nam, he had gained 3 other fathers. Meanwhile, a small boy was crying, begging for help because of his mother and little sister. That scene was playing on the TV at home, and little Junwoo asked what those people were doing, and he was surprised when they explained that it was like the game he liked so much. In the movie, they were acting. While watching Athena, he realized that none of it was real. At the dinner table, one of the men was quietly observing, and asked if the boy would like to try doing the same, leaving everyone surprised. Junwoo was happy to know the man thought he was qualified, since he was part of the family, so he paid close attention to the instructions he received. That night on the street, an unknown man was suddenly woken up. When he turned around, he found himself face to face with a small boy. Junwoo was crying, begging for help for himself, his mother, and his sister. just like he had seen in the movie. Afterward, he reached out his hand holding a few bills he had received from the man, believing he had done a good job. The man who had proposed the idea was surprised to learn the act had actually worked, and even more surprised when the child asked when he could do it all again. Satisfied, he smiled, thinking about how he could benefit from it all. From that day on, Junwoo actively took part in the cons planned by his parents. Every scam they got involved in ended in success. This made the boy an even better actor, and over time he even began creating his own scams. He started to enjoy more and more the fact that no one ever doubted his lies. Thus, he wasn't just a son of the family, he was a member of a group of con artist performers. Time passed, and the house where the boy had been raised still stood. Now an adult, he was shouting in frustration, saying he didn't want anyone messing with his work. One of the men said it was about 100 billion won, and he couldn't stay out of it. Another worried that there was really no way out, but believed Junwoo was smart enough to come up with something. The young man put his hand on his head in disbelief, saying there wasn't much they could do and that they should give up. One of his fathers got angry, grabbed him, and said that if they were caught this time, they'd be in serious trouble. And so, the men began begging their son to think of something and help them. While listening to them, stressed, someone placed their hands on his shoulders to calm him down and tell him not to worry so much. It was his first father, reminding him that soon they would all be retired anyway. He tried to say it in a carefree tone, but the hand on the boy's shoulder was trembling with nervousness. And so, Junwoo quickly noticed the man's anxiety. The young man closed his eyes, thoughtful, reflecting that maybe this was the best thing that could happen. He was already tired of that life, and had no idea what he was getting into when it all began. After he was caught in prison, he knew that one feeling that kept growing was regret. In his cell, he kept reflecting on that useless emotion. Lying on the floor, cold and in the dark, he thought it was all over. He realized he had been raised by greedy parents with limited vision. His whole life had been lived in hiding, and he concluded that it all ended there. However, suddenly, he hears someone calling him son and opens his eyes in surprise. He soon realizes it was his father shouting in front of them. While sitting in the living room chair, the man collapsed to the floor. Junwoo was confused, not understanding what was happening. Suddenly, a chicken drumstick appeared in front of him, and it was his first father saying he had made that food for him, while the other man was chasing him. However, the young man still didn't understand what was going on. He looked carefully at the man lying on the ground, who was laughing and saying he had saved a drumstick for the boy. Stunned, he listened in disbelief as the man told him he would be starting school soon, so he should eat plenty. Junwoo looked at himself and didn't understand how he had become a high school student. After that, they came up with a plan for the scam they would carry out at the boy's school. While one of his fathers was talking, he noticed something during the explanation. He looked at his son, who was sitting in front of him. Junwoo kept a distant and thoughtful gaze. Furious, the man asked if the boy was paying attention, and then resumed the explanation of the plan he was putting together. The boy, upon hearing it, immediately realized which building they were talking about. They believed that if the son attended the school, he would build trust, and with that trust, go to the hotel with the principal. And there he could hand over the fake contract papers for him to sign. He would then head to the planned location where Jang Junwon and Park Bing-sik would be waiting disguised as criminals. The principal would ask to cancel the contract, not wanting anyone to think he was involved with criminals. So the men listened as Junwoo concluded that, at the end of the plan, they would demand money from the principal as a cancellation fee. The boy said that since he had no role in the plan, he would leave first. The men then began to discuss whether the boy was going through puberty, and that when the boy found a target, he became extremely focused on it. One of the men asked what the other was talking about, and whether it was about what happened last time. While they talked, the young boy watched them through the slightly open door, and then closed the door, leaving the place. Days later, the boy went to the bathroom and turned on the sink faucet. In front of the mirror, he realized that the conversation he had overheard had already happened in the past. Staring at his reflection, he concluded that he had indeed returned to the past. He had lived 35 years of his life, and now he was a student again, and this would be an opportunity to not repeat the same life again. As he reflected on this, one of his fathers opened the bathroom door, calling for him. He handed him a paper, saying it was the case they had been dealing with the previous week, and realized that now he had an important role in the entire plan, and the man believed the boy could handle it. Junwoo, looking at the paper, mentioned that it was an important job, but also pointed out that it was dangerous. Furious, the man said that nothing they did was all that dangerous. After saying that, the boy noticed the expected reaction from Jang Junwon, and he saw there was a backup route plan in case of special circumstances, using a boat. But looking at the list of passengers, there were 4 names, and none of them were Junwoo. The boy quickly concluded that he wasn't included in that plan. Jang asked if he was scared, and if he was going to abandon them. However, our hero replied that he would never do that since he had been doing well so far. The man explained that the boy would attend that school because of the principal involved. That way, the boy couldn't show his face recklessly or make friends. Moreover, he reminded the boy that they were the only ones who would accept him. No plan that had reached our young hero had ever failed, but if any did, it would have been because of his father's will. They controlled him, brainwashing him to serve their own gains, seeing him only as a tool for making money. Thus, that was the only way the men feared the boy would be exposed to the outside world. Since he was little, he watched movies that encouraged him to act and lie. The men feared that if he changed his mindset, he might run away and leave them, but there was still someone who cared about him. And Junwoo didn't understand why he kept repeating so much about the boy changing his life. He tried to convince his first father that he wanted to keep doing that job, because he liked it, and the man felt saddened by the boy's resistance to changing his mind. In that memory, the young boy left him, convinced he was making the right choice. But it was all because, at that time, he didn't understand that his father wanted to protect him. At another moment, his father said there were other paths the boy could follow, like working in an office, for example, or even as an actor. And he quickly becomes pleased with the idea, since his son had always enjoyed acting. Jungwoo listened happily, as he had never thought of that idea before. Back home, the man opens the bathroom door calling for the boy. He invites him to eat something with him, and during the meal, the man notices that Jungwoo was finally enjoying the taste of anchovies, and is surprised since the boy used to hate them. But as he talks, he realizes the boy is quiet and looking lost, so he asks if there's something his son would like to tell him. At first, the young man showed no reaction, but when he started to speak, his father listened attentively. However, he didn't expect his son to say that his life was coming to an end. After that, at school, one of the staff members was trying to gather the scattered students. As he worked, the man could feel the mood on that first day of the retreat. While gathering the group, they called for Han Jungwoo to join them. When the boy heard his name, he said he'd be right there. As a staff member was informing the students of the instructions, the young man noticed something on his phone. His father had sent a text message wishing him a good trip. The boy smiled as he read the message, and so the group continued their field trip on a bus. When they arrived at the location, it was already night, and the weather was rainy. One of the bedroom doors inside the lodging was closed. A man sat alone, complaining that those kids were always causing trouble. But as he opened his box, he thought it was all this effort that made it worth it. And inside it, there were some bottles of alcohol he had brought to the retreat. Satisfied, he started planning that he could drink with one of the teachers that night. But suddenly, he was startled when someone burst through the door of the room. He wasn't expecting any visitors and was confused about what was going on. Jungwoo stormed into the room, furious. The man became angry at the boy for how he was treating the instructor. Our hero admitted he was sharing a room with noisy teenagers and just wanted to take a nap there. The instructor, confused, started asking for the boy's name and which class he belonged to. However, the man was furious and decided he would punish the boy, grabbing him by the collar of his shirt. The young man, caught in the moment, gritted his teeth in anger, and then extended his arm, slapping the instructor and pushing him away. The man was stunned by the student's boldness. Still angry, Jungwoo said he doubted the staff member would actually call his supervising teacher like he had threatened. However, while the boy was speaking, the open collar of his shirt revealed a mark on his neck, and so the young man quickly realized his body was exposed. The instructor, upon noticing the boy's tattoo, started questioning who at that age would have something like that, and whether his family was involved in crime. But seeing the man's concern, Jungwoo decided to stay calm about the situation. He chose to downplay everything and challenged the instructor once more to call his supervising teacher. However, the staff member had no information about that student, but he decided he would call someone responsible as soon as possible and rushed out of the room. As Jungwoo watched the man leave, he realized he could run off faster than expected. Sitting on the couch, he noticed a box in front of him and was pleased when he saw what was stored inside. There were the hidden drinks the staff member had brought to the room. In the hallways, one of the employees was explaining to an instructor that Jungwoo wasn't the type of student to cause trouble, but the instructor was still concerned about the tattoos he had seen on the boy, and so they decided to check the room. When he opened the door, the man shouted, calling for Han Jungwoo. But upon entering, he saw that the boy was no longer there. The staff member noticed a strange smell and asked if an instructor had been drinking alcohol in that room. While denying it, the other staff member noticed something odd and then pointed to the table in the center of the room. There were several bottles, cans of alcoholic beverages, and cigarettes. The instructor tried to convince him it hadn't been him, but the man no longer believed him. He looked toward the window and saw that the night was rainy, and concluded that the priority now was to find out where the boy had gone. Meanwhile, outside, Jungwoo was standing in the rain. Far from the school's lodging, he was staring at the sea. The young man was deep in thought about everything he was experiencing at that moment. There he realized that yet another one of his little role-playing games had come to an end, and he reflected on thinking he would feel reborn after the small chaos he had caused. Stepping near the edge of the cliff, he realized that all of it had been nothing but lies, and in the end, he just felt strange. Until that moment, he believed he was living as if he were in a movie, but looking back, he was just a criminal. And pouring out the last drops of liquor from the bottle, he decided that today would be the end of his life. He closed his eyes and felt the rain touch his body, accepting that it was the perfect day for it all to be over. However, he heard someone from afar shouting that they had found him. In the rain, a few staff members began to question what he was doing there. He turned silently, looking at the men who had come searching for him, and so the staff began to shout, telling him to step away from that dangerous place. Then, near the edge of the cliff, he decided that everything had been enough, and it was time to end it all. He took a step back, placing his foot on the edge of the cliff. He opened his arms, ready to throw himself. Meanwhile, all the men began running toward him to save him. He leaned his body backward, throwing himself off the great cliff, saying goodbye to the life he no longer wanted. And as he fell, it felt like the movie of his life was unraveling too. After all that chaos, on a sunny day inside one of the city's buildings, some people were talking. Two men were discussing a performance that was supposed to begin in about 5 hours. They began to consider the possibility of refund claims and compensation for tickets, since the person who was supposed to perform hadn't shown up. Patiently, one of the men ordered the other to send individual apology letters to the ticket buyers. The man grew furious upon hearing that, as trust was something crucial in business. He was Jew Mansik, and he had been a member of the National Assembly about 5 years ago. Because of that, many tried to take advantage of him, and he ended up betrayed by those he trusted most. While fighting for power, he chose to stay silent, and all that remained were manipulated scandals and abandonment. So the best thing to do was leave the political scene. And that's how he decided to start his own business. And that's how he began managing a small theater. 5 years had passed, and at first, everything was fine. And even though it was just a small theater, it attracted quite a bit of attention. And being a small theater, his strategy of recruiting unknown actors instead of famous ones worked well. He knew very well that what would attract the audience was the name of a famous actor. However, what truly maintained the quality of the show wasn't fame. What mattered was how well they could portray their roles, and how deeply they could move the audience. That's why he had focused on turning actors into big names. And so, the theater became a place to discover new talent, but it didn't last very long. These young actors had their dreams set on Seoul, not on that place. And as soon as they started there, once they gained some notoriety, they went off looking for other theater companies. This was the third time it had happened. Dissatisfied, Mansik walked through the halls, questioning whether the problem was himself or the world. But then he was surprised to hear voices coming from behind a closed door. He thought he must have left a film playing when he exited the room, and so he opened the door to check. However, he was surprised by the presence of a young man sitting in one of the theater's seats. He quickly recognized the high school student who had shown up there before, and observing him, he noticed that his clothes didn't match the age he appeared to be. But every time he finished watching a film at the theater, he left a few bills behind. And the boy was possibly the theater's most regular customer. After observing the boy, he asked what his name was, but the young man said he didn't have one, which left the man confused as he didn't understand why the boy wouldn't want to tell him his name. After hearing that he looked like a high school student, the boy admitted he was 17, but that he didn't attend school. As he left the room, he apologized and said he thought there wouldn't be any problem in staying there to watch. So Mansik continued talking to the boy, trying to get more information. And suddenly, the boy remembered something and stopped for a moment. He turned to the theater owner with a few bills in his hands. He extends some bills as payment for watching at the theater once again. However, the man becomes furious since he hadn't asked for any money. But he quickly grabs the boy's arm upon noticing something. He looks at the boy's wrist, which appeared to be injured. The boy, unconcerned, says he's fine and will deal with it once he gets home. But Mansik isn't satisfied with his answer and keeps staring at the boy's wounds, and the boy is left speechless by the situation. Then he pulls his arm back and says he's about to leave. However, Mansik quickly steps in and asks if he was only interested in watching. He tells him there were scripts and recordings on site too, but he soon realizes he's speaking in a jumbled way and starts to feel a little foolish. The boy stares at him, not understanding what he's talking about. So Mansik invites him to stay a bit longer, get proper treatment, and then he can leave. After hearing this, the boy is surprised by the invitation. Then they leave the place and go talk at a diner in the city. While the boy eats, the man admits he didn't expect him to accept the invitation to talk. Sitting at the table, Mansik admits he doesn't understand why the boy subjects himself to the kind of work he does. Observing him, he notices the boy is young and good-looking, and there were better things he could be doing. While listening, the boy senses something different in the conversation. Then Mansik holds some papers in his hand that he wants to show the boy. There were a few words written on the pages, and he soon tells the boy it was a new script he had received. Noticing the boy's curiosity, he hands over the pages. The boy begins flipping through them, analyzing what the script was about. He starts reading one of the scenes written, and on another page, he reads through some of the scene's lines. Mansik is pleased as he watches the boy, and while Jungwoo reads, he waits for the young man to say something. But the boy reads the pages slowly, and this already makes Mansik impatient. When he can't take the waiting anymore, he quickly snatches the script out of the boy's hands. He says that since it's a brand new piece, he couldn't let him read the whole thing. And again, he stares at Jungwoo, expecting a reaction. But earlier, while the boy was reading, he had noticed how serious he looked. And now that he no longer had the script in his hands, he says he had read a few pages quite well. Mansik is surprised that this was the only reaction the boy showed, and soon becomes furious, realizing the boy didn't seem very enthusiastic about a project he'd worked so hard on. So he asks if the boy really wasn't interested in the story. Jungwoo admits that it wasn't that, but that he believed the script didn't suit that theater. Upon hearing that, the man is confused about what he means. Jungwoo explains that in the first few lines he read, the characters were talking under umbrellas next to the stage, and he starts describing the scene he had read, leaving Mansik surprised by his talent. As Jungwoo spoke, he realized the boy had memorized the lines from the script in just 1 minute. Mansik watched in disbelief as the boy ate, and then asked how the play should happen, according to the boy's opinion. Jungwoo explains that the characters met the way it was written in the script, and he agrees with that. The boy says the stage was too small for the characters to walk and talk in that scene, so Jungwoo suggests a few changes to make the scene more effective, and he believed this would make the new scenes leave the audience even more curious about the story. While eating, he wrapped up his suggestion with the dramatic entrance of the script's main character. Mansik listened without knowing what to say, impressed by the boy's talent and imagination. Jungwoo, not thinking too much of his own suggestions, continued eating calmly. But the man spread the pages out in front of him and asked him to keep going. He quickly explains that he wanted the boy to do the same with the other parts of the script. Jungwoo starts reading the story again and calmly flips through the pages. Meanwhile, Mansik waits eagerly for the ideas he'll hear, and soon after, Jungwoo starts analyzing character positions, movements, and audience perspectives. He also considers lighting, color tones, and temperature hues. In addition, he suggests a few seconds of breathing pauses between each line, and he believed those were things that didn't require someone to be a professional to assess. So Mansik is impressed to realize that all it took was a single comment from the boy to help him adjust his script. When he finished, the young man returned the papers, placing them back on the table. In disbelief, he asked when the boy had started studying stage directing and schooling, and upon noticing Ju's enthusiasm, the young man regretfully said that he didn't work in that field. The man was even more impressed when he heard the boy admit that he had seen his first play only recently. He also admitted that his real desire was to watch a movie, but there were no cinemas in that city. Mansik felt his body tremble when he realized the first time he had seen that boy was 3 weeks ago, which meant he had learned all of that in just a few days. However, a theater play didn't involve just acting, as most people tend to think. In practice, the reality is very different. It's an art created by several specialists, like writers, music, lighting, and directing. But at that moment, that young man, just by reading the script, had understood all of that on his own. On top of that, he had only been watching plays for 3 weeks, and as he watched the boy, he still couldn't believe that in such a short time, he was capable of writing his own scenes. Ju, convinced by all of this, made a decision based on what he had witnessed. He admitted to the boy that he wanted him to do the same job, but this time with acting. Jungwoo became thoughtful and quickly explained that he couldn't because he didn't know the actors. The man, upon hearing that, concluded that the boy had a limitation when it came to writing dialogue. Mansik understood, believing it all depended on the actor's ability. However, the young man explained that it had to do with things like habits or facial expressions that didn't go away with acting. In other words, if he didn't master that, he wouldn't be able to direct the actors properly. Ju, upon hearing that, was once again amazed by the young boy's ability. The man knew he was in denial because it was hard to accept something like that. And he was surprised when Jungwoo suggested that he smile in front of a mirror to understand what he meant. Jungwoo had noticed that he dilated his pupils when he smiled, which would be ideal for a serial killer character. Once again, the man listened in shock, not knowing what to say. Jungwoo explained that he was just joking as he got up to leave the diner. Speechless, the man realized that this boy had a brilliant talent. Noticing that Mansik wasn't showing any reaction, the boy asked if he was also leaving the diner, but getting no answer, he said he was heading out and thanked him for the meal. Once alone, the man, still impressed, felt as if he had been hypnotized. Mansik had many questions about the boy, but settled on believing that he would find him again the next day. But the next morning, Jungwoo had gone to the place where he worked in construction. He was there to demand his payment. He reminded his bosses that they had promised his overdue payment of 587,000 won. The boy's demand made the men furious, and they made it clear that he would never see that money. Still, in a friendly tone, Jungwoo asked once more if that was really the case. Convinced, he accepted the harsh reality that he wouldn't be paid for his work. Jungwoo had tried to let it go at first to avoid conflict. His bosses used the excuse that times were tough and that this sort of thing happened with other workers too. However, they knew nothing about the boy, only that he was young and had no parents. But Jungwoo knew they were also skimming money from other workers. Still, despite everything, the young man now wondered where he would find another job. And suddenly, while they were talking, they were interrupted by Mansik bursting in through the door. But before all that morning, Mansik had been waiting for Jungwoo, sitting in one of the theater chairs. Growing impatient, he realized the boy was already late in showing up. While talking to one of his employees, he mentioned that the boy didn't attend school and worked in construction. As a suggestion, the man told Mansik to look for the boy at some of the construction sites. It turned out Mansik hadn't thought that he might be working, and he was surprised by the idea, so he ran out of the theater to look for Jungwoo. He began running through the streets, hoping to find him, and after a short run, Mansik was already out of breath. When he arrived, he came across a huge construction site. There, he noticed a small closed room where he could hear some people talking. He decided to open the door to check. He entered the room yelling, demanding to know why they were cutting the boy's wages. The men were shocked by his sudden entrance and told him that the area was restricted. He grew furious and flipped the table in the room, throwing everything into the air. Jungwoo watched without knowing what to do, while the man said it was shameful what the others were doing. He turned to the boy, calling him, asking why he was just standing there. Then he decided to leave the place, pulling the boy along with him. After that, the two of them left and returned to the theater. The young boy listened to Mansik complain about the behavior of those men. However, the young man didn't understand why he was so bothered by the situation. The man explained that he disapproved of that kind of behavior and that he should report them, and reminded him that he was an adult trying to help the young man, and that he should be grateful. But when he finished speaking, he looked carefully at something he had just remembered. Looking at the boy, he noticed something different. His wrist, which had been injured, was now bandaged. He suggested that Jungwoo leave his construction work behind and come work there with him instead. But after offering the job, he suddenly remembered, and began to think about how much money he had lost in the last month. But he was quickly interrupted by the boy, questioning the reason for all of that. Mansik also pointed out that working there, he could keep watching the plays he liked. However, the boy still didn't understand why the man was trying to help him. Mansik explained that his part-time employee had quit, and now he was looking for someone new. Jungwoo noticed the concern in the man who didn't seem to have much money and was already worried about many things. He got offended when he heard that, thinking Jungwoo believed he wanted to steal from him, and he became even angrier when the boy confirmed that thought. The man said he would pay him even if he had to work in construction in his place. After that short argument, he started to look thoughtfully at the boy. He began remembering the previous day and realized he didn't remember everything the boy had said, but he felt it was unacceptable to let the boy waste his talent on construction work. He believed everyone belonged somewhere, and he wanted to keep the boy close. While the man was reflecting on this, the boy waited in silence. But suddenly, he was surprised when he realized the boy was showing interest in the offer, and he asked if, by working part-time, he would also be paid for watching the plays. After that, a new day was breaking outside the theater. Mansik waited standing, leaning on a pillar. There, the man started to wonder why the boy wasn't coming out. Looking at the clock, he questioned if the boy might be more meticulous than he thought. It had already been about a week since Jungwoo started working there, and that day he was supposed to organize the rehearsal room mess. However, he should have started organizing 3 hours earlier, and when Mansik realized how much time had passed, he thought they might eat together when the boy finished. So he decided to go to the room to see if something had happened due to the delay. And then he entered the room, asking how long it would take him to finish everything. However, he was startled by what he saw, and stood confused, seeing the young boy crouched on the floor with several books scattered around him. The boy explained that the shelf had collapsed. So he looked at the shelf with all the scripts organized and concluded he already knew what had happened. He believed that while the boy was organizing the room, the shelf had fallen over, causing him to lose time. But even so, looking around, other books were also spread across the table, and other things were out of place, like a flower vase fallen onto his things. The boy explained he had gotten interested in reading the script, but Mansik was confused by all the mess and asked if the boy had been rehearsing the performance, and then he noticed something he hadn't before. The book in the boy's hands was a Russian play, and he questioned the choice of a Russian book, considering there were so many Korean ones. But the boy pointed his finger, explaining he had already read all of those, and that left the man shocked once he realized what that meant. When he looked at the shelf, he saw that Jungwoo had already read all the books stored there, and in the middle of all that disorder, Mansik asked why he had chosen a Russian script. While the boy held the book, he was asked if he even knew the language. However, the boy admitted not exactly, and then he pointed to a book on the shelf, a Russian dictionary. He explained that he had looked up several words and thus managed to get an idea of the book's context. Upon hearing this, the man was stunned. He was in disbelief, realizing that just by looking at a few new words, the boy was already gaining knowledge of a new language. He began observing the book in the boy's hands once again, and soon realized which work it was. He had studied that script countless times in the past and already knew which chapter the boy was reading at that moment. It was the scene where the character vents his emotions, knocking things over in his room. Upon observing, all those things scattered on the floor weren't there randomly. The boy had captured the emotions of the character in the scene perfectly. All of that without even knowing the basic principles of classical acting. And so Jungwoo stayed quiet while the man asked what he wanted to become in the world. Mansik couldn't understand why the boy wouldn't respond to him when he was near. He wanted to know the boy's dream. Was it theater? Acting, directing? He wanted to hear it. But he was surprised when he heard the boy admit that his dream was to live exactly the way he was living in that moment. But back then, he didn't understand what all of that meant. He listened, confused, as the boy explained that he was just setting the stage before the scene began. Jungwoo showed no reaction when the man asked him if he would start acting. But Mansik was satisfied to realize that the boy hadn't rejected the offer. He was also surprised to notice that the boy was interested in acting, as he had assumed he was focused on directing. Then it started to make sense. His great interest in watching the stage performances, but he emphasized that he still believed the boy had more talent for directing than acting. Jungwoo explained that he hadn't arranged the place for no reason. All those objects were placed with purpose. Mansik quickly responded that good actors could convey emotions anywhere. However, the boy explained that on stage, things work differently, and the man grew confused, unsure how the stage itself could be connected to acting. Jungwoo said that on stage, everything needed to be in harmony, and that was just as important as acting skill. Therefore, his desire was for the stage itself to be perfect. Upon hearing that, the man became thoughtful. Meanwhile, the young boy observed him, waiting for a response. Then he decided to demonstrate right there. He lightly touched the table with his hand. Bent over, he focused to begin rehearsing the role, and Mansik stood still, watching what the boy was about to do. Jungwoo placed a hand on his head and began his performance, and from the very first expressions the boy made, the man was already stunned by his talent. From the very first moment, his expression was that of someone with nowhere to go and nothing left to lose. He wasn't just reciting lines, he had become an entirely different person. Even the whites of his eyes were red now from burst blood vessels. He began to wonder if it was really possible for someone to enter a character that deeply in such a short time. He began questioning the purpose of all those objects. While acting, the boy slammed the table with force. He stretched out his arms, leaning his bent body on the table, and as he stepped back, a clock lay on the floor, and then he stepped on the object, and as it shifted under his weight, he flinched. It threw him off balance. Mansik, watching the scene, realized that all the objects around him had made him stumble. But observing carefully, he realized it was all part of the performance. The boy, losing balance, reached out and grabbed onto a chair. He stood up, trying to compose himself. His body was trembling. Then he sat in the chair, looking anxious. Mansik, watching the scene, grew more and more impressed. He realized that not a single movement had been a mistake. Grabbing the chair while falling had been completely natural. His posture, the angle, the way he moved his body, and the broken objects scattered around him had all been planned. Even his pale expression as he sat, as if he had no strength left to stand. He realized the boy was right. All the elements had to be in perfect harmony. When the performance ended, he stood up normally and turned to Mansik. Even though he was amazed, the man decided that it wasn't over and told the boy he should go up on stage that very moment. Chapter 8. Up to that point, it had been 2 years since Junwoo had separated from his parents, and it hadn't been easy to find a part-time job, but he had decided he no longer wanted his old life, so he had spent every day working in construction, building a satisfying routine. However, even though it was satisfying, he knew there was something more. He knew exactly what he had been desperately searching for. While working in construction, people would say he was young and should be out having fun. One of his coworkers had mentioned there was a theater in the neighboring town, and the boy was surprised to hear the man suggest he should check it out. Junwoo grew thoughtful about it and started to reflect. Then one day, he decided to go and stepped into the place for the first time. There he came across people acting on stage, and he realized it wasn't a movie, but a play. And the moment he entered the theater, he noticed a single man sitting in the audience. This man was watching the play attentively. However, that wasn't what really mattered. What truly mattered was his disappointment that it wasn't a film. And there, for the first time, he felt overwhelmed. The energy of the actors performing on stage, far from the cameras, hit him differently. And for a moment, he felt a strong urge to be on that stage. From that day forward, every time his work ended, he would go to the theater. In that place, his body moved before his thoughts. That's why he kept coming back again and again. And there, one of the staff members asked the boy for his name while he was sitting in the audience. The man insisted on asking questions about the boy. After that, he invited him to talk more. At first, he found the man a little annoying, but he knew he wasn't a bad person. This same man had taken him away from construction work, believing he was wasting his talent with those people. And so he realized that people like him probably hadn't had an easy life either, and he was happy to know that. And after all that, he finished his performance for Mansik. The man, who had been impressed by everything he had seen, wanted more, so he said the boy needed to be on stage. Mansik admitted he hadn't expected much from the boy's acting, and that emotions come with experience. Besides, no matter how talented he was only 17 and had limitations. He also knew the boy had an exceptional mind, but that was different from having a natural artistic talent. But either way, after all he had seen, he realized something. Everything he had believed was a thought from his limited mind. He realized that all the skills he admired in the boy were tools that helped him prepare to perform. While the boy picked things up off the floor, Mansik said he wanted to see him acting on a real stage. But the boy said that wasn't what he had planned. And upon hearing that, Mansik became furious, saying his talent was being wasted, and that he could become someone great. Junwoo started organizing the items on the shelf, and his disinterest left the theater owner confused. The boy admitted he had no desire to become famous, and the man was speechless at the boy's thinking. The young man knew his own talent, and that becoming famous was natural once he started acting, but that shouldn't be a reason to give up. He tried to convince him, saying in an understanding tone that he knew the boy had a difficult past. Mansik admitted to the boy that getting this far hadn't been easy for him either, and then told him he'd take responsibility for whatever came next, but that the boy should do whatever he wanted and live his life. And upon hearing this, the boy quickly turned his face toward him. He found it strange that the man wanted to take responsibility for someone he'd known for less than a month, and was surprised when the man confirmed he was willing to. Mansik begged to know what the boy wanted in exchange for starting to act. And with that, Junwoo was preparing behind the stage curtains. He anxiously peeked through the gap in the closed curtains, and there he realized he had really stepped onto the stage to perform in front of so many people. In the audience, some people were sleeping and looking at their phones. Others were having fun and chatting among themselves. Back behind the curtains, he watched them from a distance. It wasn't like he didn't understand how his uncle Mansik felt. In truth, it was something he pretended not to know. That wish for him not to waste his talent and the offer of a job that let him watch plays freely. And now the man was willing to take responsibility for the boy's future. Maybe that's why he couldn't refuse him, and now he was up there on the stage. And slowly, the curtains began to open, and so the young boy stood before a crowd of people, ready to begin his performance. Mansik watched from afar, behind the scenes. Seeing his style, he was happy to realize it was finally starting. One of the theater staff asked if that was the boy he had mentioned. Mansik explained that despite the boy having had very little time to prepare and the script being long, the boy possessed an extraordinary talent. Thus, 5 days would already be an impossible amount of time for anyone to prepare without learning the basics of theater. But he told one of his staff that the boy hadn't had 5 days. He'd had only a few hours. Mansik revealed that young Junwoo had only had 12 hours of preparation since the script landed in his hands. And even so, the young man was there, ready to begin the performance. After the curtains opened, the boy extended his hand to begin the scene. Seated in a chair with the spotlight on him, he began his monologue. People in the audience started whispering about what they were seeing, and in no time, they were stunned by the boy's talent. He recited his lines, and in a touching manner, began crying during his performance. The scene was about someone who had been left behind, and the emotions they experienced because of it. Everyone in the audience grew more and more amazed by his talent. The boy acted out the line that he couldn't have done anything differently. He stood up from the chair forcefully, letting it fall to the ground. He said there were no choices, that he and his beloved lived in different worlds, and then knelt on the floor sorrowful. And so the audience was even more moved by the story. The theater employee, watching from a distance, was impressed. He asked Mansik where he had found someone like him. Mansik realized that even without a voice projector, everyone in the audience was focused on his performance. The man explained that it wasn't about memorization. It was that the boy had become the character on his own, and the lines changed slightly as the emotions came. So if the boy on stage really were the character, that's exactly how he would have spoken. As the play continued, a woman slowly entered the stage. The character greeted Jungwoo's character, and looking at her, he called her Ellie. And at that moment, Ellie collapsed into the boy's arms. He wept as she delivered her lines, until suddenly, she forgot what she was supposed to say. Mansik panicked as he realized what was happening. Unsure of what to do, he saw that the girl had forgotten her lines. It wasn't uncommon. An actor with little experience could easily forget their script on stage. But unlike in films, in theater, there's no way to reset the scene, so the actors must act naturally. Jungwoo began to improvise in the scene. She said she didn't need to say anything else because he already knew. And just like that, he continued the play, taking control of the situation. He carried on with the performance, embracing the girl who had collapsed to the floor. And so, in a tragic and moving moment, the curtains closed, ending the show. The audience watched, deeply touched, and when it ended, a wave of applause erupted from the crowd. Behind the curtains, Jungwoo and the young actress still hadn't left the stage. Mansik watched them as he walked. The man was astonished to realize that all of that had been prepared in just 20 hours. Most actors needed weeks to memorize their lines, but the boy had done it in just a few hours. And beyond that, he had been able to support a mistake made by the actress at the end of the scene. Mansik and his staff were amazed at how naturally the boy carried himself after finishing his first performance. He told the boy that it was wrong to think he hadn't prepared for the role. If the boy paid attention, the stage, the chair size, the movements, the colors, and the lights had all been changed. The staff member was surprised to learn that Mansik had allowed Jungwoo to change everything. Mansik explained that the boy had constantly made suggestions about how things should be, so he had no objections, but he quickly emphasized something important he had realized. That young boy was better than everyone else there. After that, sitting in the dressing room, Jungwoo began to experience a strange feeling that hadn't been his first time acting. In his past life, he had played countless roles while pulling off scam. That's why he knew he had talent. But this time, he was feeling something different. All those people with their eyes fixed on him. The audience cried with deep emotion. Just like everyone else was moved, it felt like everyone, including him, had stepped into another world for a moment. He was living in an unfamiliar way in this second life, ready to end it all. And he had even thrown away his own name. He believed he could live like that, but could he really do the same? Suddenly, someone forcefully opens the door, making a loud noise. Mansik rushes into the dressing room, heading toward the young actors. The girl apologizes for the mistake she made, but the man ignores her and walks past. He reaches out his hand and places it on Jungwoo's shoulder, and he looks pleased with how the boy had performed on stage. He starts shaking the boy, asking why he wasn't reviewing his script in the dressing room. The boy admits he didn't want to be tied to the line. However, Mansik thought it was just another one of the boy's cryptic ideas. So he begins to reflect, recalling he had heard that somewhere before, that true preparation meant carrying the character within you. Then he remembered a woman saying that when faced with a long script, you shouldn't cling to your lines. Instead, you should understand the character's emotions and act naturally. He had heard the actress say from the stage that this was how she had been working for around 20 years. But what was curious was hearing those words from someone who had only just started acting. In addition, the boy said there were many unfamiliar terms in the script, which was giving him a headache. When Mansik heard that, he was speechless. And analyzing the boy, he realized he still didn't know the basic stage terminology. He soon realized he had handed the script to him without even thinking about that. While they were in the dressing room, one of the theater staff called the actors to begin the second act of the play. Jungwoo stood up. Mansik was surprised when the boy called out, and he turned to the man and told him he'd be back soon. On stage, he continued his performance alongside Ellie. He delivered his lines with confidence and smoothly carried the story forward. At the end, the audience applauded enthusiastically and joyfully. However, someone was watching from afar with a serious expression. This man felt satisfied knowing he had finally found the boy. Time passed, and on the day after the performance, the young boy was inside the theater, sitting on the floor. There he was reading some books and scripts, but he was soon interrupted by someone. Jungwoo looked up to see Mansik holding a bag. Then the man poured some books he had brought onto the floor. The boy looked surprised, and the man said that while studying might not be fun, it would be useful for him. There was only one bookstore in that entire town, and he had gone there despite the heat. Jungwoo, holding one of the books, concluded that the man must have been bothered by what he had said about not having them before. Still seated on the floor, the boy started flipping through the new books he had to read. Watching him, Mansik thought the boy probably didn't even need to study that kind of theory, and he began to wonder if he was repressing the genius instincts the boy displayed. But to his surprise, the boy found the reading enjoyable. He admitted it was the first time he was studying that subject, and it was more fun than he imagined. Mansik was stunned to learn this was the first time he had read something like that, and the boy admitted that it wasn't just actors who were capable of acting well. Not understanding what the boy meant, Mansik warned him to be careful with what he said outside that room. Jungwoo quickly pointed out that it was the man who got involved in things without thinking first. Mansik didn't understand what the boy was referring to. And the young man clarified that he was doing exactly that at that moment. So Mansik didn't show much expression when he heard that he didn't know anything about the boy. After saying that, the boy went silent, watching him while still sitting on the floor. And so he became thoughtful about where that conversation was heading. After closing the book, he asked if it was really Mansik's wish to make him famous. But surprisingly, he said that wasn't exactly what he hoped for. He explained that what he truly wanted was for the boy to live doing what he really wanted to do. Moreover, it had taken quite a lot of his time to understand that. He admitted he imagined the boy thought he was just trying to use his talent. He explained that even if the boy hadn't done a good job on stage, he still would have bought him that book. Jungwoo listened, but still believed his friend was benefiting a little from his talent at the theater. Then he said he had enjoyed the book, and that, either way, he would need that knowledge. The man was surprised, and the boy continued studying the subject. Thus, Jungwoo concluded that one day he would repay everything Mansik was doing for him. That afternoon, at the theater, someone arrived asking for the owner. Mansik was surprised, as he wasn't expecting any visitors. However, when he saw who had arrived, he was shocked. The mysterious man was surprised to learn that he was the owner of the establishment. And so, as Mansik observed him, he began to question what he was looking for in a place like that. The mysterious man quickly realized that Mansik was responsible for the success of the place. It was the company NK Entertainment, famous for discovering new Korean actors for films that had become major hits. This was Choi Jae-min, director of the entertainment company. The man admitted he was there because he had attended the performance the day before and had become interested. When he revealed that he was looking for the lead actor, Mansik became extremely worried. He began to wonder if the boy had gotten involved in some kind of trouble. The man revealed that he was there to make an offer, regretting not having announced his visit in advance. He had arrived a bit rushed, since it had been a long time since he felt what he saw. When he watched the boy, it felt like he had discovered a new talent. Moreover, he admitted that this wouldn't be just a typical actor hiring, since it had become difficult to find young actors with such maturity for his project. But that boy had performed as if he were already in his 30s without the slightest hesitation. As he watched him, he realized the boy had gone even beyond that. Choi admitted that the offer was serious, and he was impressed to discover that a talent like that was hidden away in a place like this small theater. Mansik admitted that the boy's ability was much more than just impressive. However, Choi was caught off guard when the man asked if there was a true plan for the boy. Mansik explained that he knew the company did professional casting, and he was interested in knowing whether they were willing to provide the basics that an actor would need for the boy, such as education, invitations to major events, training, and projects. However, Choi was stunned to hear that the man was asking whether he was truly offering such an opportunity for free. But Mansik made it clear that after seeing the young boy's performance, all of those requests were perfectly reasonable. Upon analyzing the offer, the man said he would review it, though it wasn't something he could decide alone. Mansik realized that based on the man's excitement, he didn't fully grasp the boy's true potential. But suddenly, he was surprised by something. The man handed him a business card and admitted he had come to offer a place where the boy could truly grow. And he added that since Mansik cared about him, he hoped he would consider what was best for Jungwoo. And so, as they said goodbye, the theater owner said he would think it over and get in touch. Meanwhile, inside the theater, the young boy was lying on the floor, surrounded by several books. As he thought, he came to the conclusion that there wasn't much he could do, since he didn't have money at the moment. However, he wasn't someone obsessed with money, but it did limit him a bit. He took a deep breath as he sat and thought. Mansik watched through the crack in the door, wondering if the boy was really feeling bored. The young man quickly noticed someone approaching. His friend admitted that he had come to check if he was really studying and wanted to ask a few questions. But when he looked at the books, he was instantly shocked. When he picked up one of the scripts, he realized the boy had done something on his own, and he was impressed to see that the boy had translated one of the scripts. So he decided to read that Road of Dreams while joining the boy, and he was pleased as they talked. However, he was quickly surprised again. He was stunned to see the new translations the boy had done in that language, and he stood up suddenly. Jungwoo watched him, confused, not understanding what was happening. His friend suddenly began running out of the room, saying his stomach wasn't feeling well anymore. As he left, he slammed the door hard, making a loud noise. Outside, he stood still, reflecting on what had just happened. He began to wonder just how much more the boy would continue to surprise him. He was happy, because he had always dreamed of this, but didn't understand how someone could improve so much at acting. He knew he had failed many times in his life, but he had never felt so uncertain. He no longer knew how he could guide the boy with his own limited experience. While they were studying together, Jungwoo asked him to teach the parts he didn't understand. And when he analyzed the book they were studying, he became concerned. But he was quickly relieved and grateful to realize that he could, in fact, teach that topic. It was about the theory of the fourth wall, an imaginary wall between the stage and the audience. He explains that it's when the actor interacts directly with the audience. The young man listened attentively, learning that it was a form of entertainment in theater, and so he asked his friend to explain another topic. Mansik was pleased to say that the next one wasn't difficult either. Time passed, and he was now attending his theater classes. Inside the building, someone entered the office. A stack of books was slammed down hard on the table. Seated, Mansik held in his hands a red-covered book. It contained theater topics he didn't fully understand. He looked satisfied, thinking he never imagined he'd revisit that notebook at his age. Then he began studying the first lessons he had encountered in the world of theater. Something he once loved to study had become a passion that only lasted a short while. He understood that with natural talent, refinement, and passion combined, someone's growth could be unimaginable. However, that boy didn't need theoretical books. He already had a professional level, so he decided to walk around the theater to check something. He watched the young boy. He knew he could memorize scripts perfectly with ease. He could absorb emotions, the habits of characters, and understand lighting and scene angles, so he knew that this was a true artistic level. Jungwoo had already rewritten dialogue by capturing only the character's emotions. While analyzing the boy from afar on stage, he came to a conclusion. He held the card that Choi had given him and thought that it might be a good option, so he decided to call Choi Jaemin and invited him for a face-to-face meeting to discuss important matters. After that, the men went to a diner in the city. Jungwoo calmly sipped his drink, and Mansik waited patiently. As he watched, he wondered what more he could do. He convinced himself that he had made the right decision. They would discuss the offer and propose terms. So while on the phone with Choi, he explained that they would go over everything together with the boy. Choi explained that he also wanted him to see Jungwoo acting with one of his scripts, and asked them not to feel too impressed, as watching actors perform was part of the process. During the call, Choi concluded that a good offer from the company would not be rejected by the boy, so Mansik started to reflect thoughtfully on the boy's behavior up to that point. When he had explained all of it to Jungwoo, he questioned how he could change his mind and persuade him. While at the restaurant, Jungwoo ate his meal, and his friend, Mansik, watched uncomfortably, saying he felt strange around the boy. He asked if the young man had ever been to Seoul before, and surprisingly, Jungwoo said he hadn't, since he had never traveled. Hearing that, Mansik was shocked, unable to understand how he had never gone anywhere when the opportunity was there. But he quickly realized that wasn't the point. They were there to talk about something else. So he asked if the boy had heard of the Yuksum building, and said he'd be surprised seeing it in person. Excitedly, he said it had 63 floors. However, the boy didn't show much interest. He continued eating quietly. Mansik explained that Seoul would be tomorrow and invited him to come along. He said it was a place completely different from rural areas, and mentioned other tourist spots the boy could visit. But the young man remained silent. Trying to stay enthusiastic, the man began to think of how he could convince him, and soon admitted he wished the boy would at least take a look at the city. However, Jungwoo still seemed disappointed, and said that he had a friend who was very greedy when it suited him. But Mansik listened in disbelief, and he began to wonder if the boy already knew everything. He questioned whether he had overheard the phone conversation, or if Choi had already contacted him earlier. Then he concluded that he probably should have discussed the matter with the boy beforehand. But before he could say anything, Jungwoo showed interest in going to Seoul the next day, so he became curious whether the boy wanted to visit any specific place there. And he began to reflect, admitting that he didn't want to take him because he thought he needed professional training, but because that company could offer him much more than that. So Jungwoo listened to him admit that even though he didn't know him very well, he knew they could help him. He believed the boy needed to meet people on his level, and that his theater was only a temporary stop for someone like him. If Jungwoo didn't evolve, he would become stuck in that stage of acting. After hearing the explanation, Jungwoo became interested in finding out where the place was located, and his new friend explained that it was the company NK Entertainment, but the young man didn't show much emotion. Impatient, the man no longer knew how to convince him. He then decided to ask if he was going, but received no response, so he began talking about NK Entertainment as they headed to the location. He asked if it was the production studio he'd seen on TV, with all that new equipment launched that year, and soon heard the man confirm it while checking the window. As they spoke, they were greeted by a staff member. She led them to the door of a room and asked them to wait. Mansik took a deep breath, seemed to calm down, and prepared himself for what was to come. He then extended his hand to reach for the doorknob. Outside, Jungwoo asked if his friend was going in with him, but the man explained that he was only opening the door for the boy. As he entered, Mansik wished him a good conversation and told him to come back safe. So while walking into the room, he heard someone welcome him. Inside, two men were waiting for the young boy. Choi extended his hand, pointing to a chair and inviting him to sit. Jungwoo, while observing, immediately recognized Choi Jaemin and realized that sitting next to him was someone else. It was Gil Junho, the acting director of NK Entertainment. And so, the young boy calmly entered the room to talk about whatever they could, and he stared at them closely, analyzing the situation. He reflected deeply on Junho's importance within the company. He had been such a famous actor at one point, and anyone who liked movies would know who he was. And currently, he was playing supporting roles, and someone like him wouldn't normally appear in a place like that, which meant he was there with a purpose. Choi began the conversation by kindly asking the boy's name. The boy explained that he didn't have a name and was planning to choose one at that moment. The man, upon hearing that, found it curious that he wasn't called by anything. Additionally, upon analyzing the boy, he found it odd that he wasn't the slightest bit nervous in his presence. And he began to believe Jungwoo knew who he was, considering that he lived in a small town. Choi suggested they get to know each other gradually and explained that he had been impressed when he saw the boy's performance at the theater. During the conversation, the young boy explained that he had started acting 2 weeks before that performance, and he admitted that it had been his first time doing that kind of work. Choi was stunned by what he was hearing from the boy, and as he processed what he said, he wondered if it was true. He placed a book on the table and explained that he was planning to bring the boy into his company. And so, Jungwoo held the book in his hands. It was called Miraculous Change. He remembered seeing it in his past life, a story about a high school student and a teacher who had switched bodies. While he read the script he'd been given, Choi watched him silently. He then admitted that he was interested in seeing the young man act, even for just a moment. Upon hearing that, Jungwoo turned his head and looked back. When he looked toward the door, he noticed someone was there trying to listen in. Outside the room, Mansik was trying hard to eavesdrop but couldn't hear anything. As they talked, Choi asked him to start reading from page 34, and upon hearing that, Juno found the situation rather unexpected. In his entire life, he had seen young actors begging for them to let them act. But to his surprise, that wasn't what was happening now. What shocked Juno the most was that normally Choi would have kicked someone out for acting like that. In other words, it made him question just how good that boy really was. And so, Jungwoo opened to page 34 and read the scene that took place in a noisy school hallway. Their students were chatting, causing a lot of noise, and Taekyung tried to understand what was happening around him as the camera moved closer to his face, capturing his expression. Among so many students, Taekyung appeared extremely confused and frustrated. He adjusted his tie, wondering why he was even there, but then was startled to notice that something had happened to his voice. After finishing that part of the scene, Choi turned to the boy and said that it would be an easy line to try. Jungwoo started forming a script in silence, and once again looked to the side, distracted. He kept glancing at the door of that room, thinking about his friend Mansik. He looked for a moment at the ceiling in the corner of the room, lost in thought. He placed the script back on the table and admitted that he couldn't do it. Choi, confused, tried to understand if something had gone wrong. He walks over and touches the notebook, saying he couldn't truly feel those lines. The man, curious, then asks if the boy had struggled with the setting where the scene took place. But he admits it wasn't about the lines. It was that the room was too quiet for such a chaotic scene. There were sounds of skateboards, laughter, and the wind blowing through the window. All those noises blended with the characters' dialogue, and that was what was missing there. Upon hearing that, Choi begins to wonder if all of that would really make a difference. Juno watched him attentively and thoughtfully. He puts his hand on his chin without showing any reaction. But analyzing the boy's words, he becomes confused. Then, the man suddenly stands up, startling the others, and grabs the script on the table. He quickly opens it and starts reading. He's briefly startled by what he notices. Choi is surprised by the situation, as he had never seen his friend like that before. He quickly remembers Mansik, wondering if he truly would offer all the resources the boy might need. So he looks back at the boy, reflecting on it. He soon suggests that he give it a try, even if the conditions weren't ideal, considering it was only a simple audition. But upon hearing that it was an audition, the boy is shocked, as he thought he had been invited to perform. Confused, he says he doesn't understand, since he believed he had been invited to come and act. As he paid close attention, he realized that this role required a partner. Meanwhile, Juno continued immersed in the script. He noticed that the featured actor this time was Mr. Gil Juno, and he remembered characters he had played in the past. Realizing that, Jungwoo thought the idea he had was rather amusing. So Choi is surprised when he hears the boy ask if there was another script available there. He explains that he thought it would be interesting if he could act together with Jill, and the actor, upon hearing the suggestion, is surprised. He then admits that working together would be better than acting alone. Choi finds the comment interesting and is impressed by the boy's boldness. Looking at him, he concludes that his courage came from his youth, but instead of rejecting the suggestion, he was surprised to see Chuno support the idea. Then he turns to the director and also asks if there was another script, which leaves him even more confused. He looks on in disbelief, realizing that he was actually willing to act alongside that young boy. And confused, he widens his eyes, shocked, and begins to question what his friend had seen in Jungwoo that he couldn't. After that, Juno begins his role, playing a deeply concerned man. He shouted at Jungwoo, saying he should. Choi, watching his friend's performance, wasn't impressed, as he already knew he was very talented. Juno was playing the role of a 40-year-old teacher. Next, Jungwoo begins shouting as well, saying he was also upset about the situation. Juno says that after switching bodies, the other had become younger, but he hadn't. He complained about his clothes, which made Jungwoo's character even more curious, as it wasn't the right moment for that. While acting, Juno was impressed with the boy's talent. He thought maybe it was just in his head, but the boy was truly adapting to the scene with ease. Juno says it wasn't his fault, and Jungwoo's character also reminds him it wasn't his either. The boy reminds him that while their bodies were switched, he shouldn't do anything reckless with his body. He watched, surprised at the boy's physical expressions during the performance. A trembling body, anxious expressions combined with a certain steadiness. In addition, the gestures, the angles in his gaze, and slightly narrow movements. And while acting, the man realized that not even he could have pulled it off with just a script, without proper preparation. Jungwoo was desperate in the scene, as his character was extremely stressed. Soon he calms down and goes quiet. They continue acting, and the boy expressed himself heavily through body language, gestures, and facial expressions. Meanwhile, Juno didn't show any reaction, but he was deeply shocked. He knew that if the boy truly decided to stand out, his own performance would be overshadowed. In that moment, he understood that, just as he suspected, the boy had been right about the performance. So he started questioning where that kid had come from and what he was doing there. And suddenly, while still acting, the man said he would stop there. Face to face, they halted the scene. Jungwoo concluded that acting with him had been completely different and thanked him for the help. Junho is surprised to hear him say thank you, and quickly concludes that he should be the one saying that. Moreover, he thinks that a young man like that could be even better developed in the right environment. Junho turns to a young man and admits that he had fun too, and says he believes he won't forget that day. Choi is pleased to see the boys interacting and that they had exceeded his expectations. Junho admits it had been so incredible he didn't even know what to say, and explains that now that they had seen the boys' performance, they could talk a bit about the details. And Jungwoo admits he had changed a few things that were written. So the man begins commenting on a few moments from the scene they had done together. The boys explain they had adjusted their gaze to better fit the situation, and meanwhile, Choi gets lost in the conversation. But Jungwoo is surprised, since Junho should have known that if he truly understood theater. Upon hearing that, the man is completely shocked. After that, Mansik calmly enters the room, but is soon surprised by something he saw. Sitting at the table was Gil Junho, and he hadn't known he'd be there. While he had tried listening through the door, he had heard their performance, but he couldn't believe that the other character had been played by that actor. What he didn't understand was why his expression was so serious in that moment. But before he could say anything, he was surprised when the man asked if he ran a theater. Mansik explains that yes, but it was just a small theater in a countryside town, and he's curious why Junho was so interested in learning about his productions there. And to his surprise, the actor explains that he was interested in performing on his stage. He's in disbelief at realizing he might have the chance to feature Gil Junho in one of his productions. Mansik regretfully explains that he doesn't think he could afford to pay him, and calmly, the man explains that money wasn't an issue. He admits that he had become a bit greedy, but that only made Mansik even more confused when it came to the subject of greed. He admits that if the actor had reached an agreement with Jungwoo, there would be no problem, but he's startled when Junho explains that everything was fine, but he was curious about something. He still couldn't believe that such a talented boy had only worked at that theater. The man apologizes if the boy felt offended, but Mansik found the thought completely understandable. In a casual tone, Mansik explains that it was hard to even call what Jungwoo did for the theater work. He admits that he didn't know much about the boy, just that he studied and read a lot of scripts and books. Upon hearing that, Junho is in disbelief that the boy learned so much with so little. He begins to recall the boy's performance and soon concludes that he was self-taught. Mansik explains that it was a natural talent, and no matter how much he questioned it, he would just end up frustrated trying to understand. Still, afterward, Junho explains that he was still interested in working at his theater. Mansik listens to the proposal satisfied. The actor gives a light, content smile, and so the two seal the deal with a handshake, eager to work together. After that conversation, Jungwoo waited outside, observing some paintings. He analyzed them closely while thinking about the conversation he had just had. He stayed there observing what each depicted scene was about. Thoughtful, he showed no reaction. He began to recall the scenes he had lived through while teaching alongside Junho, and even so, he still showed no reaction. He was soon interrupted by Choi, who arrived and greeted him. The man looked happy and satisfied even before saying anything. Jungwoo says he was about to ask if the man truly wasn't interested in being part of his productions, and so the young man watched him, considering the opportunity. However, the man is surprised when he hears the refusal. Choi respects his decision but admits he had never felt so disappointed before. He hands him a card, saying that if he ever changed his mind or needed help with his performances, he could reach out. And the conversation ends with the boy agreeing. Afterward, they return to the theater as usual. There, they mess around with some tools. Mansik was tired but had finished what he was working on. He looks at it, satisfied, and concludes that he believed the boy and Junho would be able to work well together on that stage. Soon, it's Jungwoo who asks him what he's doing there so early. The boy explains that there was a staff member there, so he didn't understand why Mansik was handling that. Mansik thought the boy's thinking was practical, but he hadn't minded doing it himself. Jungwoo listened to his friend say that maybe it would be a good idea if the guy stopped pretending a little and just had some fun. And without saying anything, he watched as he walked down the stairs. I went down, grabbed the ladder leaning against the wall, and put it away. The young man, upon looking at the place, was surprised. Mansik admitted that he had adjusted the entire setting just as the guy had recommended. He fixed every detail, and that had truly impressed him. Jungwoo honestly didn't believe that small details could make such a difference. At that moment, the young man realized he had never noticed his friend had studied theater for many years. And right then, he saw that Mansik had high expectations for the performance they would deliver. He then admitted that the setup had indeed turned out much better. It was then that he decided to try something. Mansik admitted that maybe it was to try fixing what still needed work afterward, and he quickly turned around. He pointed out that he was still curious about something. He admitted that, no matter how hard he tried to understand, he couldn't figure out why the guy had turned down NK Entertainment's offer. However, Jungwoo chose not to answer. His friend said that if he had accepted, he would have had the chance to write and work on famous scripts. Mansik admitted he had never truly understood the boy before, but he was genuinely curious about that. Yet again, the young man simply didn't answer, and suddenly he said he simply didn't remember. Mansik pushed him to answer and asked if maybe he had done it for him, but the boy ignored him and invited him to go grab a snack, so they left the theater while chatting. After that, when they returned to the place, a door was wide open, and people were talking inside. Mansik looked over discreetly, curious to know what it was about. Inside, he saw Chuno writing something down and wondered what the actor was looking for there. In that room, he was having a quick talk with Junwoo. Without realizing it, he figured out what it was about and quickly concluded they might be rehearsing a bit together. Later on, at another moment, Mansik walked through the theater right after waking up. That was when he came across Juno, who had been coming there every morning to practice, but he still thought that behavior was suspicious. Instead of focusing on his acting, the actor always seemed more interested in discussing acting with Junwoo. Then he overheard someone ask why Juno just wouldn't leave. Mansik admitted to a guy that he still didn't know the reason, so he watched thoughtfully. Sitting on a bench, the actor seemed somewhat confused and impatient. Noticing that, the man asked the boy if he always acted like that. He believed Chuno always had a weird vibe whenever he practiced with the guy. Mansik admitted that even so, Juno turned out to be more friendly than he had expected. Suddenly, the man stood up, interrupting them, holding a notebook in his hands. He walked toward Junwoo, but the boy walked away before he could say anything. The boy admitted he didn't hear anything else that needed improvement and that the interpretation would remain the same. The actor was surprised to hear that he should figure it out on his own, and was shocked by that. Outside the room, Mansik quietly watched. He concluded that, apparently, some things had changed around there. As the week went by, the preparations for the performance were coming to an end, but there was still one problem. The play's name was The Stalker of the Neighborhoods, but when looking at the show's poster, one thing stood out. One of the characters simply didn't have an actor. So out of the 4 roles that needed to be cast, only 3 had been selected. While using the computer, he thought about it, and there he was reading some posts on the online theater community. Gil Juno had been cast as the detective Anton, and as expected, people were very happy about it. He figured he should feel relieved. However, his concern was still about the fugitive Pavel, and people also noticed that no actor had been selected. So with only a week left before the performance, someone was still missing. In other words, they couldn't perform without announcing the full cast. As he opened the auditorium door, he wondered who would be there that late at night. When he walked in, he was surprised. He stared in disbelief at the room. On stage, Junwoo was finishing setting the scene, leaving it spotless. The boy quickly realized someone had arrived. He was surprised to see his friend there so late, and concerned, he asked if Mansik didn't like it. Speechless, the man looked around stunned. It was as if he couldn't recognize his own theater. Junwoo explained that, after reading so many theory books, all that knowledge couldn't go to waste. Simple objects had been added to the set, helping to create a better atmosphere. However, Mansik was in disbelief when he realized that the boy had modified what he had already prepared. Nevertheless, the boy explains that he had done much more than just observe the work, and upon hearing that, the man is left speechless. Meanwhile, Mansik kept looking at the boy and the whole scene around him, and he notices something that impresses him. Junwoo was tired from all the work and runs his hand across his forehead, and then fixes his hair. But that small gesture made his friend start thinking, and upon realizing something, he asks if the boy had always been that handsome. That question leaves the boy confused, since in his past life he had always kept his face hidden. The young man had never thought about it, and soon he notices something. Mansik looked extremely. Junwoo realizes that his friend must be thinking deeply about everything that was happening, not because it was a completely different level compared to the last performance, which had fewer than 20 people, and that this time some rumors about him might start to spread one way or another. And thinking about that, he gives a satisfied smile. He realizes he had already come farther than he ever imagined. Worse, reflecting on the past, he gets angry at himself for having repressed all of it for so long. This was his second life, one he had somehow managed to get, but he had no idea how. While reflecting, Mansik interrupts him, asking if he was alright. So Junwoo admits he is, and that he wouldn't cause any trouble for his friend. Upon hearing that, Mansik is shocked. How could he have known about that concern of his? The man admits that, if the boy wanted, there was a way to keep his identity from being revealed. He said this with much regret, as it wasn't what he truly wanted. However, he's surprised when the young man says it didn't matter anymore. Mansik reminds him that the boy would probably appear in the news and interviews circulating the city, but he didn't expect that the boy wouldn't care about that anymore. And soon Junwoo asks him, what could be worse than losing your life? He hadn't expected that reaction from the young man, and is left without knowing what to say. So he tells him to continue as planned, and admits that he would be disappointed if the boy were to disappear like that. And there, in the middle of that whole scene, the boy turns back to observe the stage. But Mansik was still analyzing him, unsure of what to say. His friend says he shouldn't worry only about the stage during the performance. He promises he wouldn't let anything bad happen to the boy because of the show in his theater. Junwoo is pleased to hear those words coming from his friend. After that, the next day begins as usual. Online, people were talking a lot about how the identity of the lead actor had finally been revealed. And now, on the poster, the cast was complete. And there it was, the name Han Jung-woo for the role of the fugitive Pavel. Throughout the city, the poster for the performance had been announced, and so, on the day of the show, many people had taken an interest and came to the theater. Behind the curtains, Mansik could hear people commenting on how it had been a long time since Juno had performed on a stage like that. Also, they found it curious that an actor like him was performing in such a small theater. So the man realizes that, as he expected, many would be talking about Juno. And while Juno had been practicing for the show, Mansik had been by his side the whole time. And now, seeing the audience's reaction, he truly realizes that Juno was a very famous actor. However, something else that had caught people's attention was that, despite being small, the theater was very beautiful, and that exceeded the expectations of everyone who hadn't expected much. Upon hearing that, he feels slightly satisfied with the audience. Backstage, there was a script being reviewed while waiting for the actors. There, everyone was preparing for the performance. Meanwhile, Jungwoo was looking at himself in the mirror, deep in thought. When his friend arrives, he admits that he felt as though he didn't recognize himself. And when Mansik looks at him, he's also surprised. Jungwoo quickly turns his head toward the man. He was all dressed up in a way that was not his usual, ready to begin the show. In the story, 10 years ago, Detective Anton had lost his family and a leg because of a man, and that's when the chase had begun. And besides that, there was also Pavel, a fugitive who had gotten involved in all of it by mistake. In the end, Juno would play the detective, who carried deep anger, and Jungwoo would take on the wrongful imprisonment of Pavel. So it was a never-ending chase, full of misunderstandings and surprises until the very end. The truth was hidden, and the characters' psychological issues were the key. So as the performance began, a wooden cane struck the floor with force. It was the detective walking in, using his cane. He said 10 years had already passed. It felt like an eternity. But to him, it hadn't been that long. The audience was already impressed with the little acting they had seen from the performer. Among themselves, they agreed it wasn't something they saw every day. Meanwhile, Mansik watched from afar, wondering if the man's acting was always that good. He found it definitely different and surprising, very good. So Juno continued reciting his lines, bringing the play to life. And in the dark set, finally, Juno's monologue came to an end. He then realized that truly good actors were something else entirely. The audience, so impressed with Juno, didn't expect there was still more to be amazed by. But suddenly, everyone was startled by a voice from the back, saying the detective had turned him into a monster. Jungwoo's role was of a grown man who had indulged in all kinds of bizarre crimes for a long time. Despite being only 17, his voice naturally fit the character, so he continued acting as his outraged character. The audience was simply shocked. From the moment his words began, no one in the theater saw him as a teenager. Mansik watched with excitement. The audience was breathless. And more than that, they couldn't take their eyes off Jungwoo. Finally, the climax in the story between the detective and the fugitive had arrived. A heated argument between the two, where Anton cornered the boy's character, leaving him with no way out. Pavel felt suffocated and misunderstood by the man. Then he shouted that it hadn't been him. Even Juno was shocked by the character's outburst. And suddenly, Pavel's mood changed, and the boy was no longer smiling. In a twisted manner, he began laughing a little and saying he was being serious. A woman in the audience was speechless. People simply had no reaction. Mansik watched from backstage, trembling with nerves. And soon he felt a rush of premonition, like every time Jungwoo revived one of his lines. It was an overwhelming presence, a passionate performance. In that way, everyone in the audience was stunned. Backstage, the staff and NK team were also watching. Even Juno's manager was impressed. Everyone had been captivated by Jungwoo's performance, and they were all left speechless. And finally, when the show ended, the curtains closed, and slowly, applause began to break out. The audience erupted in cheers. They had loved the performance. Backstage, the actors were relieved and proud of their work. Juno admitted that he had always been respected, but this time something felt different. The actor felt a bit embarrassed when he noticed that everyone in the audience now wanted to know about the unknown young actor. And as he looked around, he saw exactly what he expected. Everyone in the room had their eyes fixed in one direction, and it was Jungwoo. And there, on stage, the boy waved, though he didn't show much excitement. The next day, the theater had simply become news. Online, people were talking about the performance and the discovery of the new actor. Everyone was commenting on the young man who had played his role with such talent. All this while they gathered to have a meal, with some bacon frying. Mansik was pleased and celebrated the hard work they had done. At the restaurant, they chatted about the celebrations and photo sessions. But suddenly, the theater owner grew serious as he wrote something down. Jungwoo had a sad expression and hadn't touched his food. Meanwhile, his phone began to ring in his shorts pocket. Mansik grew curious, as the call was interrupting an important moment. So he stepped outside to answer it and said he'd be back soon. And then he hung up the call. He questioned if, just by appearances, someone could guess there was a talent for dancing. While complaining to himself, he was interrupted by someone calling out to him. He was surprised. He thought he was alone. An awkward man announced that he wanted to join the celebration, and he introduced himself as Yu Sangjin, a member of the production team from W Broadcasting. He said he was there with a very interesting proposal. From a distance, he looked over at the young Jungwoo. Tired of it all, Mansik adjusted his glasses, wondering how he'd handle this. Unsatisfied, he questioned if the proposal was so good that it would ruin the moment. Yu explained that he wanted to be heard first about the show they were preparing, and he said it was probably something on a scale the man had never seen before. And with that, daylight broke over the city. In an office, there was a nameplate on the door of the team leader, Park Jong-gil. Inside, the man was holding a stack of papers in his hand, and meanwhile, he was reading carefully. It was a program called Actor Kingdom, an acting audition show designed to discover national and international talents. There were no eligibility restrictions for the contestants, no limitations on age, gender, nationality, or experience. So before the main show, an audition would be held by the broadcaster, and the selected contestants would advance to the televised stage. The judging criteria would be acting ability, and the show would follow a tournament format. The winner of the competition would land a major leading role in a film directed by Korea's top director. But as he analyzed the program, he questioned what the appeal would be, considering that many people would perform well. However, he suddenly receives a phone call, and he answers the phone casually, not expecting much. But then he's hit with a surprising piece of information. He quickly stands up, saying the president didn't need to worry. He states that it wasn't his first time producing a show like this, and then he whispers something important into the phone. He reveals that the winner would be the president's son, and the man promises to make it happen. Nervously, he agrees, saying the man could trust him completely. At the end of the call, he places the phone back on the receiver and feels a bit relieved. However, he was still slightly anxious. The call had been from Kang Gunim, the president of the Damien Group, a respected conglomerate with annual revenue in the trillions of won. The budget for this project exceeds 20 billion won, and the president is the main investor in the show. He has only one son, Kang Hyuk, and the real reason for this program's existence was to make him a superstar. Jun knew that part wouldn't be difficult. He just needed to draw more attention to young Hyuk. So he needed someone from the beginning to serve as a distraction so people wouldn't become suspicious. Someone not too skilled, but full of passion, who would come off as very cliche. And in the office, a man arrives saying he brought the list. Jun thinks there's probably nothing interesting since they're always the same people. But he gets intrigued when his employee says they were lucky to find something different. So the man picks up the papers to review. There were the details of Han Junwoo. He remembers hearing about him recently, acting alongside Junho. His employee says that, apparently, he had done well performing in the theater. However, Jun refuses to watch the boy's performance video, assuming it would be boring. The man begins to explain to his boss the young actor's backstory, that he was a small-town boy, an orphan, and that he never attended school. He started going to the theater every day and decided to act, and thus developed a strong friendship with the director Ju Mansik. Additionally, he had gone to the NK company, and Juno was there to watch him perform. Jun, after hearing that, became a little interested in the story. He thought that young people nowadays should put in more effort, and that audiences were a bit more discerning now. That's why this rural, irresponsible, and innocent young boy could now be participating in a tough competition in Seoul, and that could awaken something emotional in those watching. After all that, Jun says it was enough to call the boy in. His employee seems confused by the urgency. He starts to recall the recordings they had seen of the boy performing in the theater, and he had been impressed by such talent. However, he wouldn't be on the same level as Hyuk, who had studied since childhood in international acting schools with experienced instructors. When reminded of this by his boss, he comes to the conclusion that it's true. The man explains that the boy would probably attract attention at first, but wouldn't compare to Hyuk's level. He also says that with that face, agencies would quickly go after him, so they should recruit him as soon as possible. For that reason, he was now in front of Mansik, explaining his proposal. The theater owner is in disbelief upon realizing they were trying to recruit Junwoo. The man tries to convince him that it wasn't just a typical contract, and reminds him that the whole country would be watching. On top of that, he reminds Mansik that he was one of those who wanted the boy to succeed. But upon hearing that, Mansik is displeased and feels provoked. He wasn't worried about Junwoo being used, since once his identity was revealed, nothing they planned would work. Still, something else continued to bother him. Yu asks who else should be the one to make that decision, and the man revealed that the boy in question was Junwoo himself. Mansik said he would first like to hear more about it and review the contract. However, Yu said that nothing had been confirmed yet, so he couldn't give any definitive explanations. So Mansik listened, somewhat suspicious, thinking that if it were just a simple promotional offer, there wouldn't be a problem. But due to the nature of some audition programs, the show often revolved around already pre-selected individuals. In other words, even if the boy acted properly, they could still manipulate things and spark everyone's imagination, because they had the power of editing. They might even find reasons to conceal the boy's talent, but if that happened, the show would lose its meaning. Still, he recalled that the entire country would be watching, and he began to consider how interesting it would be to have such a massive audience watching the young boy. But he quickly remembered that perhaps this wasn't what Junwoo wanted, and he concluded that maybe he was being too greedy, and the boy wouldn't find that very appealing. His approach to acting was different from the others, and Mansik began picturing Junwoo among other young people only chasing popularity. However, even while reflecting on all that, he still had a strange feeling. So he placed a hand on his head, lost in thought. Inside the restaurant, the young boy realized what was going on. By analyzing the conversation, he concluded that his friend was busy at such a late hour because of him. When he looked at Yu, he remembered the show Actor Kingdom from his past life. It had happened on a large scale and had gained international attention, and the winner was the heir of a wealthy family. After the conversation ended, Mansik returned to the restaurant, and he was immediately surprised when the boy asked if he'd had a good talk with Yu. The man was shocked to realize the boy had been paying attention from the beginning. Junwoo apologized for all the trouble his friend had gone through because of him, acting as if Mansik were his manager. Mansik asked why the boy was even interested. considering he always turned down such offers. As the boys remained silent, the man asked if he was right, but he noticed that this time was different, because for the first time, the boy had shown genuine interest and curiosity in something. Jungwoo had never shown interest in the attention he had received until now, so the man was stunned when he realized the boy actually wanted to participate. He was confused about why he would want to be part of that kind of program. The boy admitted that he was a bit curious, and that he wanted to see if it would be different this time. Still, his friend didn't quite believe it, but he admitted that he wouldn't stop him, since it was the boy's choice. Upon hearing that, the boy asked how much the prize money was, and Mansik estimated about 100 million won. Jungwoo said that if he won that amount, he would give it to Mansik as a thank you, since the man had gone through so much because of him. Besides, the theater itself was too small for the growing number of people, and it wasn't something he could manage on his own. Mansik felt that the boy had known all of this all along but was trying not to show it. Furthermore, he wouldn't be able to manage the theater from far away. His friend would have to move. However, Mansik said that no matter how talented he was, the entire broadcast would be carefully orchestrated. But Jungwoo didn't seem to care about that, and Mansik couldn't understand what had suddenly changed in the boy to make him change his mind. While deep in thought, Jungwoo began to remember several moments when he was amazed by great acting, when he used to watch television not knowing that one day it could become his reality. So he sat quietly, unsure how to explain that to Mansik. Then he simply decided to say that he thought it might be fun. And at that moment, the theater owner realized that the boy was actually serious, and he didn't understand why the boy would want to enjoy himself in a competition like that, which didn't match his personality at all. Mansik agreed, but warned him that he didn't need to do everything the production told him to. And while he explained, he was caught off guard by Jungwoo asking if the real interest of the show wasn't just using him. Jungwoo was curious to know whether they would gain anything by doing exactly what the show asked. But when he saw there was no clear answer, he concluded they wouldn't. So he decided they would do things their own way. Mansik was in disbelief when he heard the boy say he would join the show just to do things his own way. And so Jungwoo turned his back, saying that was exactly what he planned to do. And in response, the boy asks if it really mattered how it would all begin. After that, posters about the new program were spread all over the city. There, the announcement for Actor Kingdom was being made. Following that, the preliminary auditions to kick off the program's recordings had already begun. There, countless actors gathered in hopes of passing the acting test. Several young people were practicing with each other before stepping up to perform. Among them was Jungwoo, calm as always and showing little reaction. He listened to many of the young people talking about how nervous they were and the possibility of performing in front of the whole country. The actors held script pages in their hands, practicing. Meanwhile, he watched their nervousness from a distance, and he couldn't help but conclude that, apparently, everyone was busy. To quickly select multiple candidates, the preliminary evaluation was conducted through improvised acting. They had to perform a spontaneous scene of about 1 minute based on a given situation and role. For example, a failed artist and confession. When those two words were given, the actor had to quickly create a scene, establishing a character and the appropriate emotions. Since the number of participants was high, they needed to narrow it down significantly for the main competition. After that, Jungwoo walked through the hallways of the building and soon heard a man saying he was going the right way. You pointed him in the direction he should follow. When he entered the room, he came across a table of judges who were planning to record some interviews along with the audition videos. But first and foremost, the participant they should focus on most was the young man. And after the first episode, Hyuk could appear officially. Once the story of this boy had been told, Yu politely opens the audition room door. He introduces the young Jungwoo he had previously mentioned. Upon entering the room, the boy observes them carefully. One of the men says they had been waiting for him, and that he had become somewhat of a celebrity in the past few days, and soon they begin analyzing him before the audition starts. One of the men at the table says this, but he still kept a suspicious look in his eyes. Yu tries to reassure him and keep him from getting nervous, but the boy walks calmly into the room where he would perform, and tells Yu that he's feeling calm at the moment. But the man is surprised by the young boy's composed reaction. At the table, one of the staff members looked at the boy attentively. He found everything about the boy quite intriguing. He seemed to be much more than he appeared, almost too good just to be a distraction. Jungwoo observed silently as Yu sat beside him. Yu felt uncomfortable being watched so closely by the boy. When everyone was ready for the audition, a form with the name Han appeared. Yu quickly stands up, slams his hand on the table, and orders them to turn on the TV immediately. While his notebook lay on the table, the man looked around. Feeling nervous, he arrives at a conclusion. By analyzing the young man, he knew they were there to discuss how to best use Jungwoo's skills on television. Noticing him staring, the boy asks why he's looking at him like that. Yu tried to figure out if he really was just an innocent kid who had grown up in the countryside. If the boy behaved properly, he could keep appearing on the show's broadcast, even if his skills weren't all that great. However, typically, the young participants would try to make a good impression, the exact opposite of this boy. While everyone remains silent, Han begins to wonder why they were all avoiding him so much. One of the men continued to observe him attentively, and soon they hear the boy's voice voice asking what he was supposed to do. One of the evaluators realizes that the feeling he got from the boy was good, though he still didn't fit the expected image. He takes a deep breath and feels satisfied, noticing that the young actor didn't seem nervous. Han quietly listened to what the man was saying and was surprised to hear the boy's voice saying it would be a book. Then he looks at the boy again and concludes that he probably didn't know the show's production cost was around 20 billion won. He points out that even famous contestants made an effort to leave their mark. However, Han wasn't interested in that tiresome subject and yawns, and soon hears someone say the chosen words for him were tornado and confession, and that he could begin his performance. He turns his face while some people nearby are talking. The boy extends his index finger, pointing at something, and the evaluator is shocked when the boy asks if he could keep an eye on the others as well. So while seated at the table, he had turned his body and was pointing outside the room. However, the man becomes furious, concluding that the boy wasn't taking their conversation seriously. However, the young man truly didn't believe in the importance of that conversation, since ever since the participant had sat at the table, the evaluator kept insisting on talking about irrelevant things. So he focused on not losing his patience and decided to get straight to the point and listen to the prepared summary about the boy. It said that young Han, passionate about acting, visited the theater every day, but the owner had been the one responsible. But the young man hadn't given up, and after a lot of effort, joined the theater. He helped Ju recover his failed business. Upon hearing that, Han corrected them, saying he had never been kicked out of the place. The man tried to explain that the story didn't necessarily have to be 100% real, and he pointed out that, even though it was an audition program, people didn't want to just watch that. However, Han admitted he was there only to act, and the staff, upon hearing that, were surprised. The man stayed silent, watching without saying anything, and the young man stared back at him, waiting for a reaction, and he concluded that it felt like they were trying to convince him to commit fraud, not act. The staff member said he had made a mistake in forgetting that it was the boy's first time in a presentation like that, and then said that the boy had come there to act, so he should give the performance he truly wanted to give. He asked the boy what kind of acting he was most confident in doing. The man was surprised and questioned why he was even there. He also noticed that the boy, who was supposed to do a preliminary performance, hadn't brought a single script. The man pointed out that he didn't believe the boy had shared a stage with Juno for no reason, asking if he had memorized all of his lines. He explained that usually people brought their own scripts for an occasion like that, but some didn't. Han admitted that he had come because he was informed it would be an improvisation-based performance, and he didn't understand why everyone was so shocked that he hadn't prepared anything for that day. So the man began to reflect on the boy's knowledge. He knew that for improvisation tests, people usually prepared for as many scenarios as possible. He explained to the boy that in shows like that and in any other, human emotions are limited, even within their roles. So people prepared to make suitable lines come out naturally, and that was exactly the reflective ability technique. In other words, improvisational acting skill is basically divided that way. However, while explaining, he was surprised when the boy asked about the other things, since in addition to that, there were emotions, roles, situations, and so on. Still, the man didn't expect to hear the boy say that if the program had a defined scope, it would actually be convenient for him. And after that, he gave a slight twist of his neck. He concluded that since the boy had little experience, he was struggling to understand, and Han grew upset upon hearing that, at that moment, he was simply supposed to just do his best. And just before he began to believe the boy's skills would be terrible, he started to wonder what actor Juno had seen in him. But regardless, he concluded that skill wasn't what mattered here. The man waited with his arms crossed. Everyone else had already left the room, and there he sat, reflecting on the boy. And he was surprised when he heard someone say they found the boy interesting, and that they thought it was a waste to use a boy like that in such a way, with that face, that presence, and his story. But the man pointed out that he didn't seem like the other young participants. One man advised the other not to suppress the boy's image too much, and that they should capture him with a sorrowful image. In a serious tone, he told his employee that he wasn't joking, and the man stared back without a reaction. He knew that his boss didn't act like that without a reason, to be that greedy. But he also understood that many of the young people there didn't dream of becoming singers. The boss pointed out that there was always a way for models, unknown actors, and regular people who caught his attention. So he expressed that in a high-level company, even the signing bonuses were strategic and carefully planned, and that young people with popular appeal were more easily promoted and selected than unknown talents. And there the man turned to his boss, remembering something he had said earlier. Thoughtful, the boss reflected on it and agreed, saying that was what they would do. Outside, dozens of young people were waiting for the auditions to begin. Among them, standing alone, was young Han. One of the girls recognized him, believing she had seen him somewhere before, and soon someone confirms, saying he was the one who had performed in the theater alongside Juno. Upon hearing them talking about him, he slightly turns his face and glances at them from the corner of his eye. But when they realize the boy had heard them, they quickly turn away, embarrassed. Meanwhile, the young man was still waiting and suddenly notices something. The young people outside could hear the sound of crying coming from inside the room, and it had to be someone acting. Inside the room, he hears voices saying they didn't feel confident, and that their tears had dried up from nervousness. Listening to the scene, he realizes the person had failed to create the realistic sound of crying. As he walks, he's startled to notice something. Lying on the floor in front of him was a notebook and some notes. He looks around, trying to find out who it belonged to. However, all the young people nearby were busy reading their scripts. Each of them clutched their notebooks tightly in their hands, and at that moment, he realizes he was the only one without one of those. So he wonders if he had failed the screening and been abandoned. He calmly sits down with the script in his hand and begins to analyze each page it contains. He reads what had been written. With the notebook in his hands, he reads through it, and focused on what he was reading, he paid no attention to anything else around him. With a slight smile, he's pleased to realize he had never thought about things that way, and so he picks up a pen to add other notes alongside the existing ones, and remains there, seated just like the other young people in the room. Time goes by, and they all remain inside that large room of the company. Suddenly, a girl appears, breathing heavily, clearly worried. Upon spotting the young boy sitting there reading, she is startled. Han was calmly making notes on that script. She turns and, crying, asks who he is, and furiously, she tells him that the script is hers. The young girl was simply in disbelief upon realizing he was practicing using her script. He apologizes and explains that he thought someone had simply thrown it away. Still shocked, she says the boy has no idea how much a script like that costs, and that he had just looked at it for free. Han says he wasn't using it to rehearse, but that he did make some notes on it, and apologizes. The young girl still can't believe the boy had marked up her expensive material so casually. Seeing how much she cared about her script, he says he could pay her back. However, she refuses his offer and yells that she doesn't want to see him there again. And with that, she turns around, walking away from the boy and leaving him alone. After that moment, Han realizes that might not have helped at all. Meanwhile, the girl reviews the material that had been tampered with, and with the script in hand, she begins to analyze the notes the boy had written. Even she is surprised by what she reads, and sitting there alone, she becomes increasingly engaged with the new annotations. She flips through the script faster and faster, eager to see everything that had been written. Each line of dialogue in the scenes had been transformed into action notes, like tapping, footsteps, and a throat swallowing saliva, as well as a hand slapping a table and the repetitive clicking sound of a pen. Instead of voice, the emotion was conveyed through physical sound, like rapid eye movement and gradually intensifying gestures. The young girl, reading the new script notes, is amazed, as even the exact timing for each action had been marked. The boy had rewritten all the lines to be performed without using his voice, and somehow he had made the script better than before. Not understanding, she wonders why he had gone through all of that if it had been just for fun. Looking at the other young people rehearsing, she concludes it couldn't have been for fun. She couldn't understand why everyone else was rushing to rehearse while the boy had done something like that in the meantime. Meanwhile, the young man waited on a sofa, lamenting how long it was taking. Bored, he let out a deep sigh, wishing time would go faster. Next to him, he quickly notices the girl approaching with the script in her hands. She walks up to him and hurriedly asks how he had made those kinds of annotations. Curious, she stares at him and asks why and how he had done it. However, Han didn't understand what she meant with all those questions. Worried, she looks around before replying. Embarrassed, she asks if she could use the boy's annotations for her audition. He didn't expect the girl's reaction and was shocked. And as he observed her, he found himself processing the situation he had been dragged into. He quickly concluded that this had been the reason she had come after him. But what he couldn't understand was why she was asking permission for something she had claimed already belonged to her. But the girl was surprised to realize he had done such a good job with the notes and simply didn't want them. The other students at the academy were always trying to gain the best advantage. From a small tip to a major idea, they constantly fought each other. But in front of that boy, she noticed he was different. And suddenly, she imagined him as if he were an angel, pure and kind. But while the young woman thought about all that, Han looked at her, confused. And suddenly, when she realized he was looking, she became embarrassed. After that, the auditions continued in the reserved room. And outside, there was a sheet with more information about the progress of the preliminary auditions. When opening the door, you saw that candidate number 234 was performing, Kim Yoo-jin. The girl who had previously been talking to Han was now preparing to present herself. She began by stating that, on that day, she wanted to act differently from the other competitors. But the evaluators watching were already bored by her voice and the delay before her acting began. Yu, while adjusting his camera, noticed the judges didn't seem interested, so he planned to just get a few recordings for the behind the scenes, but was soon caught off guard. Suddenly, in another room, someone knocked on the door. Yu entered holding a small notebook he wanted to show the man. As he placed the notebook on the table, he said it was important that he saw it. On the notebook cover were the words Star Maker and the name Kim Yoo-jin. But without opening it, the man simply assumed it was just a regular script. However, when his employee told him it was related to another boy, the man concluded they were talking about Han. So Yu asked his boss to also take a look at something on his computer, and then he showed a file containing the recording he had made of the young girl during the audition. In the girl's presentation, the evaluators were watching, but the other two were distracted. However, they soon started to notice something different in her body language. They were aware of the reputation of the school the boy came from, but didn't expect it to be at that level. So one of the men grew tense watching her capture so many layers of detail in her acting. Impressed, he asked himself what exactly he was witnessing at that moment. When she finished, the girl took a deep breath, relieved. However, she grew anxious as she looked around. She didn't understand why all the judges were so silent. And suddenly, one of the men prepared to ask her a question. He couldn't understand how she had come up with something like that. So Kim was shocked to hear the man praise her, saying that with so little experience, she was performing like a genius. However, the girl hadn't expected that reaction and was shocked to be called a genius. She thanked them nervously and in disbelief, as the evaluators said it was obvious she had passed the test. After that, Park watched the audition recording and questioned Han's involvement in the script. Yu confirmed, saying he had continued with the interview after the recording, and Kim had told the girl that there was a boy her age who had found her lost script and made some notes in it. And upon hearing that, Yu drew his own conclusions. As his friend read the annotations, he was impressed, wondering how someone like that lived in such a small town. He concluded that Juno's influence had definitely made a difference. He quickly stood up from his chair and asked Yu where the main judges for the final round were. That day, they were the main eyes of the panel, and they wanted to know whether decent candidates had been selected. As they talked, they worried that the winner being a newcomer might jeopardize the film due to lack of experience. He admitted that despite a past failure, the image of Chon Myong still had strong marketing appeal. His friend asked if Myong had ever failed in a performance, and he joked that it wasn't worth mentioning, so they laughed a little while continuing the conversation. Suddenly, the restaurant door opened, and the men greeted the team leader who was arriving, Park. His friends already knew he had been working hard on the project, and he said they just had a very strange presentation, but with some initial potential. He confessed that when he had first met the boy, he didn't think he was normal, and even the CEO, Lee Jae-won, was interested. And apparently, he even altered one of the other contestants' scripts. The man picks up the script in his hand, asking why Park was bringing that subject up at the restaurant. But as he reads it, he becomes curious. He concludes that they would return to the matter later, back at the company, and he's impressed when someone informs him that much of the boy's learning was believed to be like Gil Chunno. Myong leans slightly over the man's shoulder, trying to read the script too. Even though the young ones were interesting, he would just appear and then vanish. The man reflects, knowing the boy was good at acting. However, as he analyzes the script, he wonders how the boy had thought of that. Inside the company, the auditions were still ongoing, and the final candidate was being called. They recognized him, knowing he was the boy from the first episode's recording. So Han calmly enters the room before his performance, but he quickly puts his hand on his stomach, realizing he was hungry. One of the judges remembers that there were instructions to give the hardest role to a boy to interpret. Staff members are startled to realize this. He looks at the form with Han's information, and doesn't understand why the boy's educational and professional background was left blank. He concludes that maybe the boy was trying not to hide behind the name of the famous actor Chunno. And so, when the young man is asked whether he had any experience besides that, he replies no. And the man, upon hearing that, is left in disbelief. It gives the impression that Han was purposely withholding something, but they wanted to know more. Han is confused when they mention he had been on the same stage as Chunno. He didn't understand that acting with someone counted as something worth credit, and his response shocks the judge. He realizes the boy wasn't wrong, but it was as if Han saw Chunno as being on the same level as him. But based on the boy's expression, he genuinely didn't understand how important that was. In analyzing the boy, he remembers that his superior Park never selected someone at random, so everyone gets ready for the boy to begin his performance. After that, the day begins, and people are working inside the company. Leader Park asks manager Yu about Han. The man worries if he had been too harsh with the boy. Yu confesses that he still hadn't watched the boy's footage, since the production team hadn't sent it yet. And Park, curious, finds it strange because the judges had made an interesting comment, and he's shocked while Yu tells him. Apparently, the judge had never seen anything like it in his life. After that, back in the small countryside town, Mansik was curious to know how the performances had gone. Interested, he admits he had never taken part in an audition before and wanted to know how the scene had played out. But before the boy responds, he falls silent in thought and admits he hadn't imagined there would be so many people because of him. However, his friend is astonished imagining what other people like the boy might be like. There had been dozens of young people, all nervous and preparing to perform. And remembering it, Jun-woo gives a slight side smile. He admits he had learned a lot that day too, and Mansik watches without reacting. He believed the boy might lose interest due to a lack of certain skills, but that didn't matter. Meanwhile, the company responsible for the show continued its regular operations. There, the recording studio was set up with professional lighting. And so, the host Seo Yeon-mei welcomed viewers to the beginning of Actor Kingdom. She believed everyone was curious to learn more about the first mission of the show. She stated that the first important thing for an actor was how much they could captivate the audience's eyes, and then prepared to reveal the first mission for the participants. She said she believed that probably no one there had seen that movie, a production that had been directed by Gu Dep-mayon, who now served as one of their judges. Unknown characters, and not unusually different genres, all isolated on a deserted island. In an extreme situation, they become trapped on the island due to an accident. Incidents occur, and the truth is uncovered, and the past is gradually revealed, strangely interwoven with the characters. In an impeccable way, the narrative is built, leading to a perfect ending, and each actor delivered an outstanding performance. As a result, most of the awards went to the cast of that work. Beyond the directing, script, and soundtrack, it was a work so famous that it was ranked in film history. So the first mission for the participants would be to choose and perform the role they found most important in that film. She says they could interpret the character with creative freedom, and the goal was to leave an impression more striking than the original. The audience was commenting on the participants they had recognized. Chon Myong observed, analyzing the crowd, and he was pleased to see that their reaction hadn't been bad so far. From a distance, he spotted Seo Yeon-mei and called out to her as she continued the program presentation. He shouted to her, telling her to pay attention. She admitted she was curious to know what had motivated so many young people to show up for those recordings. On the other side, one of the commentators said he had found a unique participant, and he soon called for participant number 97, Han Junwoo. The camera quickly focused, filming the boy among the other young contestants. He appeared on the big screen as the commentator admitted that he had watched his performance with Gil Junho and was impressed. He was startled when he heard the boy ask if he was referring to the scene where he played the madness of a criminal. Junwoo admitted that he had played a murderer before he started acting. Embarrassed, the host quickly changed the subject to avoid compromising the show. He grew uneasy with the answer he just heard. He asked why the boy didn't react with humility or enthusiasm when receiving praise, expecting a more emotional or committed response. The man said he had heard that the boy was working in construction at such a young age and without his parents. Junwoo confirmed, saying it was true. The commentator acknowledged how hard it was for young people to support themselves without help or family. Junwoo explained that it was a physical job, but his rent wasn't expensive, so life wasn't too difficult. He was content with the young man's response. He also asked if it hadn't been lonely being on his own all that time, and if the boy didn't wish he had seen Seoul sooner. Junwoo admitted that where he lived was quiet, and there was nothing bad about that. The commentator pretended to be satisfied, but couldn't understand why the boy couldn't act a little more emotional or friendly, and so they continued the interview for a little while longer during the program. After that, the man sat at the table. People had no reaction while watching so quiet. He reflected on what was happening and realized that it didn't matter what he asked. The presentation wasn't going the way he wanted, and now he didn't know what else he could ask Junwoo. After the program ended, some people gathered in a room, sorting through small slips of paper with the names of the characters. As expected, the most popular role was Bak Do-hyeon, but 2 of the 5 actors had already withdrawn from it. However, the real highlight of the film would be Ta San-nen, not Bak Do-hyeon. But suddenly, while doing this work, the man was startled. He was surprised to see that an actor had chosen the role of a background character who barely appeared, which raised curiosity. Even so, many had already said that he was talented, which could suggest he was trying to stand out in a subtle way. So the man stared at the role, analyzing it. He soon realized it was the character Lee Min-jun, and few people knew it was actually a very significant role, and the actor who had chosen it was Chong Hyuk. The man knew that the boy had built his education and professional experience abroad since childhood. He noticed that his friend had picked up on something strange. He admitted that he was confused and asked if someone had mistaken it for a different film. Upset, they stared at the roll, wondering who had sent that incorrect information.
Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.